Hey guys, welcome back to Enlightened Turtle. It's your host Kev here.
I'm conquering the spirit, I'm busting through the ceiling. I'm following your lead, I'm following the spirit.
Obviously, we've already touched on several things, several topics in recent videos relating to like the Sun Cross, early Christian worship, and things of that ilk. However, this is going to touch here on St. George and the slaying of the dragon. Now, like I say, we've got these pantheons of gods, and these seem to be errors. So you'd have like stick to the Greeks because it's the one most people know. You've got the primordial gods, which were like your Gaia, like earth and the sky, you know, primordial elemental gods. And then you had the Titans, who were like the first ones to be born, if that makes sense, the first physical manifestations of the primordial deities. They were the first kings and queens of this realm. Now, over in, say, the Bible, these individuals would be called like the fallen angels, if that makes sense. Now, the fallen angels could be interpreted as the Anunnaki or the Nephilim, and these are from the same part of the world, but there's different doctrines even within Mesopotamia. There's different ideologies, and below that pantheon, you'd have the first pantheon, which would be like the Titans, I say in Greek, and then like the Nephilim, stuff like that, over in like more scriptural, and then you'd have like the Anunnaki and like the ancient aliens field over in Mesopotamia. But then below them, you'd have like the Olympians over in Greece. You'd have the Zeus and all that, because obviously the Titans was like Kronos, and then the next pantheon below that would have been the Olympians, that would have been Zeus, you know, Hera, Aphrodite, Apollos, all that kind of stuff. And then over in the scriptural, in that next pantheon down, you would have, well, you'd have the Rephaim, because you've got like, they say like the Nephilim, they were like the fallen angels, and then they married onto the daughters of men, apparently. And then they had offspring, which were like the Rephaim, the men of renown, demigods, if that makes sense. But yeah, there seems to be like a way to navigate through most of this, and this person, L.A. Waddell, he's done a really good job at doing that. I'm sorry for the long introduction, by the way, here. So I'll get straight into reading Waddell here, and like I say, it briefly touches on like Adam and Thor. So if you hear that come up, which is why I had to make that intro, that's because there's a correlation between those two via different connection points. And then what he actually goes on to discuss in more detail is St. George. Now, St. George, sun worship, as we've touched on with the sun crosses and things like that. Well, over back, as I say, back over in Mesopotamia, over in the Levant area, northern Levant, northeastern Levant, these peoples in that area later on, after the Sumerians and the Akkadians and Persians, Babylonians, should I say, they had a resettlement period where like a reblossoming of the older gods, and one of the main ones that came to the fore was Huru Mazda. Now, Huru Mazda was like a sage of the sun. Like he was associated with the sun. He was almost a bit like an Apollo, you know, like say in a Ra of Egypt. You know, there's so many different elements of these different gods and goddesses that seem to connect, and yeah, you just got to take your time to look into it. I'm still not there yet, so if I am waffling, I apologise. And yes, we are definitely going to get straight into the reading now, so here we go. But like the later Babylonians, who transferred the chief exploits in Der, or King Der, or Bel, as we've touched on the word Bel in previous videos, to his son Marduk, or the Sun Duke, like the sun, or his son, comes together. They represented him in the form of the latter as a handsome young hero slaying a demon bull. And it's got the figure here. I'll put the images in the video, of which is from a sculpture unearthed in London, and similar ones have been found elsewhere in Britain. In these sculptures, it is to be noted that the prince plunges his sword into the heart of the beast, as said in the Edda, and that the bull is defended by its allies, the wolf, the serpent, and the scorpion. I just wanted to put that in there because that's so like mind exploding. Now, I will just read this real quick, right? Slaughter by Adam / George, St. George that would be, as the slaughter of the dragon itself, and not merely its chief priestess, who was Thor, which doesn't make sense. Arch enemy in the establishment of his higher civilization and reign of law and liberty. She probably wore in her ritual the mask of a dragon. This Edda sings slaying of the dragon priestess of Eden by Adam / George. Then came in the merry mighty son of the home hearths, Woden's son, a going to fight with the Orm. It's difficult to understand some of this harder writing, I have to be honest. It's interesting to note there though, the Orm, it's spelt O-R-M, but it makes me think of the Orm in Wales, which is obviously spelled differently. So, drop in by Modi, Thor, or Midi. Midgard, Vior, is she, that mind of all the tall wolf tribes, who stain the homesteads red. Going backwards 9 feet, the Phrygian boar, or Thor, nimbly steps from the adder, which is obviously a serpent. Spiteful with venom, the nether ogress of Na, now Mayun she sink. So I'm guessing that he stepped on the serpent and killed the serpent, and that was the priestess of Eden. But it continues. Pursuit, capture, and slaying of the dragon. Oh yeah, there we go. Further details. The incident is expanded in other Eddic lays, which give rather gruesome, realistic details of her death, on the idea that El herself was physically the destructive serpent, dragon, of the waters of which she was the priestess, and which Adam, the first great apostle, of brotherly love, was forced to slay for the good of mankind. She, as the head of the Semitic demon cult of cruel butchery of animals and human beings in sacrifice to her blood. The records, however, are of great historical and traditional interest and importance, as they are evidently based upon remotely early written records handed down continuously through remote generations of Goths, and merely modernised by the early Brythonic bards, that should say, for they contain several additional Sumerian titles for Adam, Cain, and El, and are in agreement with and explain minutely the ancient Egyptian version of that episode on the sculptures not hitherto fully interpreted by Egyptologists. And it goes on to, like I say, I wasn't going to read all of this. The launcher of the Goths, Adam, bade the Lord and he-goats, Cain. So like I say, you can see on the screen now the images that I was talking about. Here is Thor in a Persian sculpture fighting the dragon. And then on this image we have George slaying, just says George slaying the dragon. This is on a Phoenician seal from 1000 BC, so exactly 3000 years ago pretty much. On this image we have George slaying the dragon on a Persian seal which was an object that was cylindrical and you rolled out onto clay. Note the king is crowned and the dragon represented a male of the moon cult. The form introduced into Britain by Phoenician Barats or Britons is that which latterly was adopted in Britain and is still current. So I'd advise anyone to check out some of the work I did regarding the Ida Hills and the relation to moon worship there. There was a lot of information I didn't put in that video. For one, there's a lot of stone circles in the area, which is known to be venerated towards lunar deities or lunar worship, a lunar goddess. Wilson and Blacker discussed these early Loregians, these early English, inland English, northern eastern, more so. I'm assuming, because I've not heard no mention of like Cornwall, so I'm assuming it's more like northwards of Surrey, London, up that way. Which the Ida Hills, as we looked at in that video, are actually in South East Yorkshire. That's Mount Ida, and then you've got the Ida Hills in Cambridgeshire. But yeah, sorry, I'm waffling on there. Lost some train of thoughts. But yeah, he's talking about the Phoenicians coming to Britain and introducing this lunar worship 3,000 years ago. Which for me, this is where I have differences of opinion with Waddell. I think what he's finding over in the east, that's taking place circa 1000 BC, beyond 900 BC, 800 BC, 500 BC, etc. as what this seal is. This seal is supposed to be a 500 BC Persian seal, but yet he's likening it back to the evidence that he's got of this lunar worship in Britain 500 years before. Doesn't say where it was found, it's just a dragon seal, Persian, of Persian origin, 500 BC. So I think that, again, like I said, I think it's travelled from the west and came east at this point. You've had the whole Dorian influx has happened, the whole Phoenicians have expanded across the Mediterranean. The actual area of Phoenicia was established north of Israel, well, not west of Israel, on the West Bank. Basically, that whole coastal area is where the Phoenicians occupied. It's the old land of Canaan, and then you had the Phoenician settlement on the coast, and then they expanded outwards. I believe there was already a connection here, and then we just had a flooding of more peoples have come from Britain and settled in these areas. Date palm in the Sumerian sign for Uri or Ord of Edda, i.e. Chachmesh or Eden, and the sign beside the rejoicing and dancing goat. So this final image is, like I say, it's just got some weird stuff going on. Dancing goat, a dragon being slain, and you've got the half moon. And sorry, this final image, I'll do the read up on the image while it's on the screen. The record, however, are of great historical and traditional interest and importance, as they are evidently based upon remotely early written records handed down continuously through remote generations of Goths and merely modernised by early Britons, Brythonic bards, for they contain several additional Sumerian titles for Adam, Cain and El, and are in agreement with and explain minutely the ancient Egyptian version of that episode on the sculptures not hitherto fully interpreted by Egyptologists. So if you look at that video I dropped recently, about a week or so ago, regarding the chronology, now Egypt's a mess. Egypt is an absolute mess. I haven't even bothered to touch it. As much as I can, I try and stay away from it, because once you start using Egypt as your yardstick, you find yourself in deep water pretty quick. So this last image, like I say, I just read that, but this last image, slaying of a dragon on a Persian seal of King Darius, 580 BC. Note the dragon represented as a lion a sacred date palm of Uri or Ord, and overflowing man-headed sun eagle or sun hawk. Now, I'm obviously looking at the image in the book. That flying image with the wings is what we will later become to know as Huru Mazda. Like I say, the sun sage. On this seal we have a mounted St. George, who is Thor or Adam, who is spearing a dragon from and this is, I say, from a Phoenician seal from 600 BC. It's also got a footnote here saying, note the serpent is given 7 heads as a hydra, which it is called in the Edda. So here is another image. Adam, Thor, the dragon slayer, or St. George, the patron saint of England, and it just says from an ancient seal. So there's no further information on this one, but it clearly says St. George and some other Latin writing. He's dressed in what appear to, if I was to say he's dressed like a Roman there, you'd have to say, yeah, he looks like he's dressed like a Roman. Excuse me, he's got the headgear on. But yeah, that's just another image, George slaying the dragon. King Thor in this image, Endri or Andvara, as Saint Andrew slaying the demon lion in ancient Brito-Roman art. A bas relief unearthed at St. Andrews. So already we've gone through several versions of like a slaying of the dragon here. We've got Sumerian, Babylonian, Phoenician, Egyptian, Indian, Persian and Hebrew versions of the slaying of the dragon, and the hero is Adam, Thor, George, St. George of Cappadocia and England. Now again, Cappadocia, you know, this is southern Turkey, southern western Turkey. Did he come from that area or did he come from the west, travel out to Cappadocia, or vice versa? You know, it's hard for me to tell at this moment, but all cards are on the table for me. St. George slaying the dragon from woodcut in Caxton's Golden Legend, AD 1493, so we're going back like 500 years. Reduced half. Compared this drawing with that in the minute Sumerian and Hittite seals several thousand years earlier. So yeah, I mean, you've got St. George, Thor, all these other names, mounted on a horse and spearing the dragon. Now, you've also got a female in the background back there, because that's supposed to be the Mary that was mentioned earlier. You know, this obviously is not Romanized in this image. This is more medieval chivalry, you know, the age of chivalry, which is interesting though, because when you go all the way back to Arthur's time, you know, you had Pendragon, you know, like Arthur Pendragon, Uther Pendragon. The Pendragon was the main king, the king of kings, the high king. Well, George, Thor, Adam, Hindra, all these names for this St. George, he was seemingly a king of kings. So there's, again, you know, there's so much information that we still got to try and sift through here, but there's a lot of correlations between a lot of stories, a lot of cultures, and a lot of reality of that, you know. So I'm going to end with this image, and I'll just do a quick reading of what it says here. There we go. Adam's soliloquy on Arthur's seat in Eden. After Adam's complete conquest of Eden, the home of the matriarchy, with its riotous mother-son cult, and the sanguinary sacrifices, and the death of the 2 Chaldean inveterate arch enemies of civilization and liberty, El and her son, Paramore, priest Abel or Baldur. It is related in the vast verse of Thor's drubbing of the Edenites that he ascended the mountain of Eden, i.e. the well-known hill of Carchemish on the Euphrates. Now, I put that image there because we've discussed some stuff in previous videos. Apologies, let me sort this camera on. We've addressed some of this stuff in other videos and there's so much more to discuss. I'd like to get my videos out a little bit faster, but it's taken me longer to compile the data, and I'm trying to cross-reference as much as I can to make sure it's on point. And yeah, this Mount Edda in over in Mesopotamia, well, is it no coincidence that I say near the start of the video we touched on the lunar worship over in Britain? Like I say, we've got the Ida Hills, we've got Mount Ida. It's not necessarily Ida, but if you're also looking at that video on the lunar goddesses, it was Luna, not Luna. So it's possible that once we're going back this far in time to like the areas of Britain, you are seeing a etymological devolution, if that makes sense. The earlier words, which don't always sound the same, you know what I mean? It's like Luna, Luna, is the modern term for the, well, specifically in the Romance languages, it's the name of the moon, Luna. But yeah, etymologically, why couldn't it have been Lune, Luna? It's the way you enunciate it. What if it was writ different in different areas, but when people spoke the language, it was actually understandable to the ears and to the palate? It was more, the physical aspect was different than the verbal aspect, because there's the famous saying, isn't it? You know, the story of when is it Caradoc? Is it? Forgive me if I've got that name wrong. Carinius or Caradoc. One of them goes over to Rome, has an audience, and this is supposed to be a Brythonic king. Goes over to Rome, has an audience, is well treated, well respected. People stop and listen to what he has to say. Well, the key thing in that quotation, paraphrasing the story, is they listen to what he has to say. They can understand the language of the king in Britain. Ross was of the idea that the Druids were kind of forced into Christianity. Obviously, you had the pressures from Rome. Constantine the Great was converting everyone into Christianity, so everyone that was outside that sphere would have been seen as pagans or enemies of the newly formed Vatican and Roman Catholicism. So what would you do if you were a Druid in that moment in time? What would you do? Well, Ross's theory was that they slipped into Christianity under the guise of some king, can't think of his name, and they carried on their practice as like preachers of Christianity. But what if Druidism was already a form of Christianity? I know, right? Mind blown. Well, who was Jesus? Goes by many names. Who were the Druids? We have a very small data pool to pull off. People talk about Julius Caesar and people like that, but apparently his records are not to be trusted when it comes to the Druids, according to other people. You've got Tacitus, his father, Agricola, who was a diplomat, part of a diplomatic scene in Britain for Rome. What was his opinions on the Druids? All this kind of stuff. We've got a lot to discuss on that, and like I say, I've been putting it together, but I'll be honest, when I looked at it, it's quite dense. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to read it all out, but we'll have a look when we get there. Like I say, there's other stuff coming down the line as well. I've got more stuff on Waddell, more stuff on Iman Wilkins, Troy. This video has been way too long for what I've just did, so I apologise. And yeah, hope you all have a good weekend. Catch you in the next video. Peace.